banks and financial stocks, but precious metals miners, they remained under pressure today. Over in Nigeria, beverage firm Guinness rose almost 10% on the day, while market heavyweight Dangote Cement climbed over 4%, suddenly driving a 1% gain in the all-share index. Now, also coming up on the show today, a crushing defeat for Theresa May's Brexit deal, and now she faces a no-confidence vote. We'll tell you what leaders expect from the upcoming World Economic Forum in Davos. And a surge in domestic demand forces Nigerian farmers to look for alternative options. Now, of course, Britain stands at its most dangerous crossroads in decades, and that's after UK Parliament dismissed Theresa May's Brexit plan. Now, following the defeat, a motion for no confidence against the Prime Minister was put forward by opposition Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn. The deal was roundly rejected by 432 votes, making it the worst defeat faced by a sitting government in history.
Any convention of this House, by any precedent, loss of confidence and supply should mean they do the right thing and resign. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has consistently claimed that her deal, which has now been decisively rejected, was good for Britain, workers and businesses. If she is so confident of that, if she genuinely believes it, she should have nothing to fear from going to the people and letting them decide.
Last night, the House rejected the deal the government has negotiated with the European Union. Today it is asked a simpler question. Should the next step be a general election? I believe that is the worst thing we could do. We're living through a historic moment in our nation's history. Following the referendum that divided our nation in half, we dearly need to bring our country back together. And last night's vote showed that we do have a long way to go. But I don't believe a general election is the path to do that. And I don't believe that a government led by the leader of the opposition is the path to do that either.
Well, let's get the latest on that vote and, of course, the Brexit plan. Richard Bestick now joins us in London. We're also joined by Jack Parrick over in Brussels. Welcome to you both. Now, Richard, let's start with you. After today's heated debate in Parliament, is it likely that we'll see May survive this no-confidence vote? And even if she does, Richard, can or does her Brexit plan have a fighting chance, especially after last night's defeat, even if she undertakes that cross-party talk that she wants to use to seek consensus on the plan?
Uche, the likelihood is that she will survive this vote of no confidence, as indeed she survived that vote of no confidence from members of her own parliamentary party just a couple of weeks ago. The opposition leader, Jeremy Corbyn, who you heard there, described Theresa May as heading a government that you can't kill, it just carries on. So they will get through, but once through this vote, in about an hour's time from now, Uche, she will not be out of the woods by any means, because by Monday morning she has to come up with what they're calling a plan B. In other words, some kind of substitute for that withdrawal agreement from the European Union that she spent 2.5 years negotiating, that was so roundly defeated, devastatingly knocked down in Parliament last night. It's very difficult to see what kind of deal she can come up with that would satisfy all the various elements in Parliament. There is no one grouping that has a majority big enough to push through its own view of what Brexit is. Intriguingly, Uche, the markets, the stock markets and the money markets have been relatively stable. Guess why? Well, there has been so much uncertainty in this country over the last couple of months that yet more, even in the death throes of the government's withdrawal plan, yet more uncertainty hasn't got the strength left to knock the markets.
Now, as you mentioned, either way, she's not out of the woods and the Britain's not out of the woods. So, Jack, is the EU willing to grant any concessions, especially now that they've seen that the UK has rejected the current deal?
Well, this is the problem, Uche. Even if the European Union were to renegotiate some of the deal that was rejected so heavily by the MPs last night, it's likely that the aspects that they would be willing to renegotiate wouldn't be really enough to get enough of those 230 MPs to change their mind and put it through. Now, we heard from Michel Barnier speaking in the European Parliament earlier this morning. He was saying essentially that the European Union would be willing to reconsider a much deeper free trade and future relationship with the United Kingdom if the UK would be able to change some of the red lines that it holds on to so dearly. These are things like leaving the customs union, leaving the single market, and ending any sort of idea that the European Court of Justice would hold any jurisdiction in the United Kingdom when the UK finally leaves after a transition period. Now, the main sticking point is this Irish backstop issue. There's been some suggestion by some senior Brexiteers, including the former Foreign Minister Boris Johnson, that the Prime Minister should come back to Brussels after this vote of no confidence, if she survives it, and say that that backstop, this idea of a sort of insurance policy to prevent a hard border on the island of Ireland, that should simply be carved out of the deal. Now, I can tell you from pretty much across the board, firstly here in Brussels, but across EU capitals as well, that will not be an acceptable deal for the European Union, and therefore probably raise the likelihood of a no-deal scenario as well. We'll have to wait and see what happens with Theresa May, but we expect that she'll have to come back to Brussels and try and get some kind of deal on the table, or some sort of amendment to a deal in the coming days or weeks.
Well, the fast approaching realities is that there's just about 10 weeks to go until that deadline to leave the European Union comes up in March. So, Richard, looking at all the sides, are we more likely to see a no-deal Brexit, an extension of that deadline, or a second referendum at this stage?
Well, uncertainty, Uche, is the byword here. We really have no idea. Nobody does. I think Jack hit it on the head there with his talk of a customs union in Parliament today. The Prime Minister was constantly addressed on this. She was asked in that no confidence debate whether she would be getting rid of, scrubbing out some of these red lines. One of the major ones of which is this customs union. Can Britain turn around to the European Union and say, OK, we'll sign up for it? If she did that, she might get Labour on board. She might be able to get it through. She's made clear that doesn't change. And it's at that point that the opposition leader, Jeremy Corbyn, said that she was being delusional, that she's acting as if the defeat last night in Parliament was by 30 votes, not 230. So at the moment, no real movement from the Prime Minister. She says she is talking, but she's largely talking to her own backbenchers and the Democratic Unionists from Northern Ireland, not the Labour Party, the official opposition, not the other smaller parties, the Liberal Democrats, and of course the Scottish Nationalists. So it's very difficult to see what she can do with the negotiations she's continuing by the time she gets back on Monday. All the time, the clock is ticking down, and the reality of a no-deal Brexit every day becomes a greater reality. There is, of course, against that, a growing campaign for a second referendum. If this lot in here in Parliament can't decide, put it back to the people. It's difficult to get that through, but yes, a no-deal Brexit is a very real possibility with all the dramatic economic consequences that would entail.
Quite right. Well, Jack, what is the clear message coming out of the EU right now? Is it hurry up, Britain, or we'll give you more time? Give us a sense of what the message is.
A bit of both, to be honest. They're saying essentially that the UK now needs to clarify its position. What does Britain want? And as Rich has been outlining, that's what Theresa May has been trying to figure out. What can she get through her parliament? Essentially, though, there might need to be more time. And I think the understanding here in Brussels and again across the EU capitals, and the words that we hear from many of the officials, is that they think that all of the options that are going to come to us will result probably in Theresa May, if she survives this vote, or any future government having to come to Brussels and ask to extend the negotiating period for Brexit until July, probably a 6-month period, to try and work all of this out. There's 10 weeks at the moment. German Chancellor Angela Merkel says there's still time to renegotiate, still time to look at the deal, but I think many others believe that this might take more time. One of the realistic outcomes of tonight, or perhaps in the next week or so, is that Britain asks for more time to negotiate Brexit.
Well, we'll certainly be watching. Many thanks to both of you for that update. Of course, Richard Bestick joining us in London and Jack Parrock over in Brussels. We'll be bringing you more stories on the implications of Theresa May's Brexit deal a little later on the show. Well, let's move on now back to the continent. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has addressed a team of South Africa pre-World Economic Forum breakfast in Johannesburg. Now, the theme for this year's WEF is Globalization 4.0, shaping a global architecture in the age of the fourth industrial revolution. Ramaphosa spoke about the challenges facing state entities, corruption, as well as business collaboration.
We are doing and are going to do the land reform process in line with the constitution of our country. We will not depart from utilizing the clear precepts that are enshrined in our constitution to deal with land. One, at a political level, we will not allow land grabs. That is not going to happen. And the land reform process will not be underpinned by vengefulness. We want an active citizenry. You cannot have an active citizenry if you're not going to engage. And this is what I believe is the strength that we have as South Africa. So let us engage even on areas where there's policy uncertainty. We're confronted by an Eskom challenge once again. But this time round, we have taken steps to address the challenge that we're facing in Eskom in terms of the process that we are involved in. We put together a task team that met with me and Minister Pravin Gordhan yesterday, and they will continue with a number of other meetings. And that task team is working feverishly to ensure that we come up with proposals, and they've been working together with the board, with management, and a number of interesting ideas are being put on the table.
And now a look at our corporate headlines today. 2 more executives from Alexander Forbes have resigned from the South African insurance service provider, adding to the mass exodus of senior management since the ousting of former CEO Andrew Darfur last September. Now, the 2 executives are expected to leave office by the end of this month. Meanwhile, South African Airways has appointed advocate Vusi Pikoli as its Chief Risk and Compliance Officer. Now, Pikoli is currently an advisor to the Minister of State Security and was previously the National Director of Public Prosecutions at the state's National Prosecuting Authority. The appointment is part of the Striving Flag Carrier's efforts to clean up its governance. He is expected to take office on February 1st next month. And Kenya's Barclays Bank's mobile loan service, Timiza, has increased its lender loan applications from 5,000 to 10,000 per day. The rise in the application limit follows an increase in the use of these services. The platform currently provides funds to about 3 million borrowers. And finally, CFO of Snap, Tim Stone, has resigned from the company after just 8 months. Now, this marks Snap's second CFO departure in the last 12 months. After the announcement, the company's stocks tumbled nearly 8% in the after hours of trading. The company has faced high-profile troubles as it continues to grapple with a widely panned redesign of its app, Snapchat. And that's a look at our corporate headlines. heading into a short break now, but still coming up. Nigeria's opposition leader touts privatizing the state's National Petroleum Corporation. And an internet shutdown continues amidst chaotic protests against fuel hikes in Zimbabwe.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business. Only on CGTN.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects, multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in. Business in Africa is high risk. After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN. Welcome back. Let's head over to Nigeria now. The presidential candidate for the country's main opposition party, Atiku Abubakar, has committed to privatize the country's state-run oil company. Now, Abubakar is planning to sell stakes in Nigeria's National Petroleum Corporation, as well as attract private investors to drive the country's economic growth. And that's if he wins the upcoming presidential elections coming up next month. The economy of Africa's biggest oil producer has been a key campaign theme for all presidential candidates this year. Nigeria's oil sector accounts for about 2/3 of the West African state's revenue. Well, let's delve a little further into this topic with Deji Badmus. He now joins us in Lagos. Deji, great to see you. Now, certainly as elections are drawing nearer, we're seeing the rhetoric and the mood heating up in Nigeria. So what do you make of Mr. Abubakar's comments? He called the NNPC a mafia organization, and he also vowed to privatize the state firm. What are your thoughts on what he said?
Well, Uche, since democracy returned to Nigeria in 1999, virtually all the presidential candidates that have campaigned for that office now, between then and now, have always criticized the operation of the NNPC. Almost everybody you ask in this country will tell you they are not happy with the way the NNPC is run. But the problem is most of those candidates, almost all of them, when they get into office, they begin to see things from a completely different perspective. effective, and it becomes difficult for them to carry out their plan. Now, what Atiku Abubakar has said is nothing new. Other candidates have said the same thing. In fact, even the incumbent president did say he was going to turn around the NNPC when he was campaigning for the office of president back then. But then he got to office and, practically you would say at least nothing much changed, if you like. Well, in the case of Atiku, he says he will privatize the NNPC, that he's going to sell off about 90% of the NNPC and let government just control, just hold a 10% stake now in the oil giant. Good idea, some people have said, but what people have been asking is who exactly is he going to sell the NNPC assets to? Because there's that impression out there that most of these political bigwigs, especially if you look at some of the privatizations we've actually had in this country, the way they were conducted, it was later discovered that politicians, basically sold some of those assets to their cronies, and at the end of the day, nothing spectacular came out of it. A good example would be the privatization of the country's electricity regulator. I'm talking about PHC, and now it's been privatized. It's in the hands of private owners, but then electricity supply has not improved at all. So while people would want to see the NNPC privatized, I mean, to quite a number of people, the question is, how is it going to be done? And let me be candid with you, Uche. There are quite a number of those who are not in support of the privatization of that organization. For instance, most of the major unions in this country are opposed to the privatization of NNPC because their argument is that, look, when NNPC is eventually privatized, it's possible that politicians may sell them to their cronies. I mean, take your mind back. Under President Obasanjo, NNPC was privatized. I remember it was sold to Aliko Dangote, but then when the late President Yar'Adua came to power, he reversed that. So it's something controversial. Any government, if Atiku Abubakar becomes the president of the country after the next election, it's still not going to be, it's just not going to be easy for him to implement that because the process would be quite complex, and it's something that will attract a lot of debate when that time comes.
Well, JJ, with all these somewhat grand promises, let's take a closer look at Atiku Abubakar. He's known as a wealthy businessman. He was former vice president. He is considered one of President Buhari's main contenders in this year's presidential election. Now, he says his plan is to also liberalize the economy amongst, of course, the NNPC, privatizing the NNPC as well. How much support does he have in Nigeria? And what is the likelihood that we could see him unseat Buhari in this election?
Atiku is quite popular, no doubt about it. And, he's run for this office before, and he didn't do well in that election. I think he came third or so. But this time, he's running on a different platform, the former ruling party, the PDP. The PDP has got a very big structure, no doubt about that. So you would expect that the structure of the PDP would come to Mr. Atiku's aid. And then if there's one politician in this country who is heavily connected, that would be Atiku, because, I mean, he's been in this game since even before 1999. So all of that would count for him. Now, whether all of that would be able to, get him the presidency remains to be seen. Because, should I say, unfortunately for him, he's running against a man who is equally as popular, if not more popular. This is a man, we're talking about President Muhammadu Buhari now, who has run for this same office about 3 times. He got it the 4th time. And on those 3 occasions he ran for this office, he had no money at all and was able to garner, in most cases, 12 million votes without spending money. As a matter of fact, in 2007, when Vice President Atiku Abubakar contested in the election, President Buhari actually came second in that election. Nobody expected that he was going to do better than Atiku Abubakar. So it still remains a wait-and-see game, but there's no question at all that among all the presidential candidates, if there's anyone that has a chance to defeat President Muhammadu Buhari, that would, of course, be former Vice President Atiku Abubakar. And then, as I said, he has the party structure, the PDP structure behind him. But you know, there are still other issues. I mean, this issue of corruption perception now, he's perceived to be corrupt and all of that. It's one big thing that he's not been able to shake off. But we just keep our fingers crossed, wait until March the 16th, when Nigerians will go to the polls, and we'll find out if they have decided to dump Muhammadu Buhari and choose Atiku Abubakar.
Well, on that note, Deji, then what are the big issues for Nigerians that this election will ultimately decide this election?
See, in I don't know how to put this now. Let me just say, for instance, in the West, in proper democracies, if you like, especially in places where the electorate are very, very enlightened and educated, you could, clearly identify the issues that would determine the outcome of elections. For instance, it's easy, for instance, to say, well, that the big issues in this election, what might probably determine the outcome of this election will be basically about economics, security, corruption, and what have you. But it really doesn't play out like that in Nigeria's case. I mean, you have the issue of religion that will come into play. The good thing now is that the two top candidates are both Muslims. They're both from the north of the country. But, other than that, you also have other issues that will determine. Political party is a big factor. And, how people respond to these candidates, irrespective of, what the general perception outside might be about them. So it's something that is not so straightforward. But no doubt, as when the campaign is on now, the big topics, the big issues that people are talking about the economy, they're talking about security, they're talking about the fight against corruption. Of course, the president says he's... but importantly, Uche, would be what the voter would be taking to the poll on that day. And to be candid, Uche, other than these issues I've identified, like security, economy, and what have you, there are other primordial sentiments that will actually play, that will be key factors now in determining the outcome of this election.
Well, we'll certainly be watching that closely as the election comes up in February. As always, many thanks, Deji, for your insights. Deji Badmus joining us there in Lagos. Well, let's move on now. It is estimated that more than 40% of the core skills needed to perform most business roles will change in the next 5 years or so. Now, the business sector and continental governments are looking at the talent ecosystem to determine what skills they'll need to make themselves more efficient, more productive and more profitable. Well, Angelo Coppola sat down with Ziad Suleiman, COO at IBM SA, to talk about the industrial revolution as well as skills development.
Tell me about this program that you've developed. What's the objective? What's the thinking behind it?
So the thinking, I think, is largely innovative. It's to bring skills enablement to Africa. So it's not just South Africa. It's a fantastic opportunity for people in the market to understand more about technology, to be more enabled, and to get them better positioned from a skills perspective to be able to enter the marketplace.
So what kind of digital skills do the youth of the continent need to get ahead?
It's all about technology and the new emerging technologies, which includes things like blockchain, IoT, which is Internet of Things, cloud, security, quantum computing, all of those types of things.
But what about that baseline education level? How important is it that people go through the schooling system properly to develop that baseline?
We're very fortunate in today's world, especially with things like DNA, which is Digital Nation Africa, where people of different levels are able to go into this portal for free, sign up, and learn about the technology. And the more time you invest, the greater it is. I mean, Gary Player uses the example of the more you practice, the luckier you get, which is true. The more you work at something, the better you become. The more comfortable you are, the more confident you are. And the more that people, especially the youth, work with technology, spend time learning about it, etc., the more conversant they become, the better they become, the more innovative they become.
So what happens next for these people who have gone online and learned all about the new technologies to get prepared for the fourth industrial revolution?
I think in essence, The net is that it gives you opportunity and it gives you options. And in today's world, especially in Africa, you need options. Our people with the high unemployment rate need options as to how do they work. Do they become small entrepreneurs and develop something that's going to be the next best technology that changes the world? Or are they going to be enabled to be able to go into an employer, whether it be a large or a small company, to say, this is my skill, how do I add value to your business, and how do we jointly move forward?
And let's head to Zimbabwe now. The government has issued a directive to internet service providers and mobile network operators to suspend internet access. Now, this follows a deadly protest in Harare, and that's after President Emerson Mnangagwa's directive to increase fuel prices. Now, the streets of the capital have been deserted for a second consecutive day as a result of those protests. Meanwhile, police have arrested Evan Mawirire, who was accused of leading anti-government demonstrations in 2016, was arrested for allegedly inciting the violent protests that we saw rocking the nation on Monday. Now, ruling party ZANU-PF has since summoned all its members of parliament for an emergency caucus to respond to these protests.
It is the announcement in the cost of living that has occurred. It is the cost of living that has adjusted, which has caused people to complain. Fuel prices, unavailability, food prices, unavailability, lack of jobs, and a legitimate question that has resulted in where we are. The president urgently needs to be in this country. Other presidents who have similar issues, the president of France, the president of America, did not go to Davos. And those are the biggest economies. Those are the ones that have the money. Our fragile economy cannot afford a luxurious trip by the president.
Now, following those chaotic protests in Zimbabwe, South Africa's International Cross-Border Traders Association has now issued of Zimbabwe as protests spread in the country. CGTN's Yolita Njamela with the story.
The neighboring Zimbabwe has been in turmoil since the fuel price more than doubled unexpectedly. The International Cross-Border Traders Association is concerned for the safety of those who are traveling to Zimbabwe or intend doing so.
It's not safe for travelers to make any trips into Zimbabwe and out of Zimbabwe. The situation is very, very bad, as we have seen some police vehicles being banned. We have seen vehicle inspection directorate offices being banned. We have also seen some protesters shot. My concern is the safety of the people. If people are not safe, then it means we are nothing. People first, and then everything comes later. And also we are advising the government of Zimbabwe to make sure that everyone is safe in Zimbabwe. There should be no deaths. There should be no casualties in the country. Innocent people should not be killed.
Juru says his association has also withdrawn all buses traveling to different parts of Zimbabwe from neighboring countries due to the prevailing situation in that country.
A number of Zimbabwean nationals that we spoke to told us of their frustrations of having to cancel their plans to travel back home as a result of FastJet Zimbabwe Airlines that had to cancel its flights due to the unrest in Harare.
It's depressing. It's not good for the economy, because remember, the economy of Zimbabwe right now thrives on imports. It's not exporting anything. So if we highly depend on those traders who are coming in and going out. So if we say they are they are told to stay away, then it's a sorry state. It's not going to help the country.
South Africa has a large number of Zimbabweans residing here. They're watching the unfolding situation with deep concern.
The situation has reached a calamitous end. You know, we have expected that with a government that has just come into power, it is quite expected that they should be doing things to the benefit of the people. But what we see now is that the government is not interested in benefiting the people.
To have a strike there is better, because maybe they think they can change everything. They will come all right.
I must be worried, man. You know, things they are not going okay. Everything is like it's chaotic, you know.
The International Cross-Border Traders Association is currently assessing the situation and will advise when it is safe for travelers to embark on their cross-border trips. Yodisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Meanwhile, Zimbabwe's President Emerson Mnangagwa is wrapping up his three-day visit to Russia amidst growing protests back home. Now, Mnangagwa attended a business forum in Moscow, looking to drum up investment to help stem his country's economic crisis. CGTN's Julia Chapman has more on that story.
Organizers of the event say that the Russia-Zimbabwe Business Forum provided an opportunity for Russian business leaders to learn about investment potential in Zimbabwe. And speaking in his opening remarks, President Mnangagwa said that Zimbabwe is very much open to Russian business and his government is ready to guarantee the security of investments across a number of industries. And it comes after a number of memoranda of understanding were signed on Tuesday during a meeting between President Mnangagwa and Russian President Vladimir Putin, not least among those an agreement on the Darwindale platinum deposit, on joint cooperation between Russia and Zimbabwe on that project. And it's a project that has been many years in the making, but has been held up by concerns from Russian partners about instability in Zimbabwe. And speaking ahead of his meeting with President Putin on Tuesday, Mnangagwa told Russian journalists that he would be seeking loans from Russia. And that comes as Zimbabwe is trying to restructure billions of US dollars of defaulted loans, making it a less than attractive prospect for lenders. Also on this visit to Russia, an announcement came that Alrosa, one of the largest Russian diamond mining companies, would be opening operations in Zimbabwe as early as next month. So although President Mnangagwa has come under intense criticism for taking this trip at such a time of crisis back at home, he's now hailing his time in Russia as being very fruitful for drumming up investment in Zimbabwe. And in a statement that he posted on Twitter, he said that the agreement signed in Russia would give the economy not the way to reform Zimbabwe's economy. Julia Chapman, CGTN, Moscow.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a quick break. Still to come. We'll tell you what leaders expect from the upcoming World Economic Forum in Davos. And US banks warn the ongoing government shutdown could cause significant damage to the economy.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
Well, now let's recap today's headlines. In Kenya, the second phase of the investigations into Nairobi's Dusit D2 attack are in full gear. Police have made 2 separate arrests within the city and plan on bringing those involved in the planning of the attack to justice. 700 people were rescued in total, while 14 people died during the attack. And police have arrested activist pastor Evan Mawirire for allegedly inciting violence through social media amongst Zimbabweans. Now, according to Mawirire's lawyer, armed policemen apprehended him at his home. The violent protests are in response to a 150% fuel hike, which is aimed at stemming Zimbabwe's deepening economic crisis. And British lawmakers have begun debating a motion of no confidence in Prime Minister Theresa May just a day after they overwhelmingly rejected her Brexit deal. Now, the opposition Labour Party leader called the defeat the biggest in British history and urged her to step down. And that's a recap of today's headlines. And the 2019 World Economic Forum starts next Tuesday in Davos, Switzerland. The 5-day annual meeting brings together about 3,000 leaders from all parts of society. World Economic Forum executives say that German Chancellor Angela Merkel, China's Vice President Wang Qilshan, Israeli President Benjamin Netanyahu, and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe will be amongst the world leaders going to the summit. Now, U.S. President Donald Trump had planned to attend, but he withdrew amidst the government shutdown in Washington. WEF executives also offered a preview of the 5-day gathering. Its founder, Klaus Schwab, says a remoralization of globalization is needed. He said globalization produced many winners over the last generation, but now it's time to look after those who have been left behind.
Globalization produced winners and losers. And there were many more winners in the last 24 to 25, 30 years. But now we have to look after the losers, after those who have been left behind. In 2019, we are in many ways at the crossroad of history. And the fact that so many global leaders from all walks of life will join in Davos this week, next week, is a positive sign. It demonstrates a commitment of leaders to a more collaborative world, a more constructive world, and deliberately a world which is more inclusive and more sustainable.
Well, let's head over to the U.S. now, where bank executives have indicated that the country's economic conditions remain solid, but the 26-day record-long government shutdown and the unsolved trade issues could cause damage to the economy. Now, according to J.P. Morgan chief executive, the shutdown could reduce growth to zero if it goes on the whole quarter. Meanwhile, Citigroup's chief executive says the company could make adjustments to current plans if conditions weaken. Michael Corbat described the disconnect between healthy consumer and job numbers and the growth fears that have disrupted financial markets in recent weeks. He added that the biggest risk in the global economy right now is talking themselves into the next recession as opposed to solid fundamentals. And the partial U.S. government shutdown has delayed the release of some retail data, but analysts are confident it was a strong holiday shopping season in the U.S. Now, according to MasterCard, it was a particularly good year for department stores online, while in-store sales at these stores dipped again. Analysts are confident that brick and mortar can survive if they're willing to adapt. Here's CGTN's William Denslow reporting.
It's an industry on the move, and retailers are trying to keep up.
So when you click on this, you can change sizes, so that way you can really find what's going to work for you.
Startup Perfectly aims to give customers confidence when buying clothes on the web. By creating an online avatar, the goal is to see how an item of clothing fits without actually trying it on. Technology like this could be another blow to traditional brick-and-mortar retailers.
People who are adapting to new technologies, people who are thinking about the storefront almost as a showroom, they've got a leg up in this new realm.
More than a dozen retailers in the US filed for bankruptcy protection last year. And department store sales slipped again, down 1.3% during the 2018 holiday season. But there are signs online sales are picking up the slack. According to MasterCard, e-commerce sales for the same department stores rose 10.2% in the lead up to Christmas.
What we saw over the holiday season when it comes to buy online, pick up at store, and that growth in that area is where we're going to see a lot more retailers wanting to invest in.
While e-commerce provides a challenge for retailers, analysts at this retail expo say technology doesn't need to be in competition with traditional brick-and-mortar stores. Some companies here are working to improve the brick-and-mortar retail experience. Opticon hope to bring tap-and-go shopping to the mass market. By avoiding the checkout, the aim is to save customers time and save retailers money. But blending technology and traditional retail sales can be easier said than done. Meg Kinney first opened a store in New York 25 years ago and now has 6 in the city. Her digital business has grown 25% each year over the past 3 years, but only a quarter of her sales are online.
In regard to getting eyeballs to my digital presence, I'm trying to figure out how to be visible in a sea of many, many people.
Analysts believe the gap between e-commerce and traditional retail is getting smaller. They say that blending the two is the most effective way to stay in style. William Denslow, CGTN, New York.
Now, it is certainly looking like Brexit will face a hard landing. And of course, one of the things that could mean is a volatile journey for champagne exports from France to Britain. While CGTN's Elena Casas reports from Champagne, where winemakers are very keen that Britain continues to play by the EU's rules.
Charles Fournier has run the Veuve Fournier Fils Champagne House with his brother for 25 years. 80% of their bubbles are exported, much of them across the Channel.
We are a small producer, and there are a lot of British wine lovers who really appreciate what we do, so it is important.
For champagne producers, Britain is by far the biggest export market.
It was the British demand for bubbles which led wine producers here to start making what we now call champagne 200 years ago. In 2017, 27 million bottles of it were exported across the Channel, but that's 8% down on the year before, a fall being blamed on the post-referendum fall in the pound.
But exporters do fear the volatile exchange rate and a weak British economy after Brexit might mean British buyers just can't afford so much bubbly. Their other concern is regulation. After Brexit, Britain won't necessarily have to stick to EU rules on protected food labelling, meaning there would be nothing to stop English sparkling wine producers labelling their product champagne.
Champagne is the name of Champagne and not of other sparkling wines. It's a region, it's a place, and we cannot move Champagne to other places. And the Champagne concept relies on the link between a geographical denomination, the name of the region, and a set of production rules. And this is what makes a quality, which is the specificity of Champagne.
The French government says it won't sign up to any deal that doesn't guarantee protections for its gourmet products. France is also the key voice insisting Britain be forced to stick to EU rules on everything from workers' rights to carbon emissions cuts as part of any future trade relationship to prevent British businesses undercutting their continental counterparts. Elena Casas, CGTN, Épernay, France.
Well, let's turn our attention now to automobiles. An array of new cars have been unveiled at the North American International Auto Show, which takes place in Detroit this week. But despite all the razzmatazz, the issue of tariffs remains a key topic of discussion. Now, Volkswagen CEO Herbert Diess has described the tariff issue as the company's biggest concern. Well, CGTN's Dan Williams has the story from Detroit.
From sleek, sporty two-seaters to trucks that appear ready to rip through any terrain, a diverse lineup of vehicles were unveiled at the Detroit Auto Show. Toyota's two-seater Supra returns after a 2-decade hiatus, while Ford claims this Shelby GT500 is the company's most powerful street-legal Mustang ever built. Despite the glamour, there is a cloud hanging above the auto industry. The trade dispute between the US and China has seen tariffs imposed on key auto components. Added to that is the threat from US President Donald Trump that Washington may impose a 25% tax on all imported automobiles.
Tariffs are taxes. So first of all, you got to change the words. People use different words for different purposes. It's really a tax. To raise the prices of the vehicles somewhere in that range of $1,500 to $2,000 across the board. Is that good for the auto industry? Is it good for the economy? I've got to tell you, the answer is clearly no.
That is a view echoed by Volkswagen. The German company announced here that it will be investing $800 million into an electric vehicle manufacturing facility in Tennessee, creating 1,000 jobs. It comes after the company held discussions with President Trump late last year. But VW remains deeply worried by the tariff threat.
No, that's a big, let's say, concern for us. It's very dangerous for the Chinese market. We are very strong in China, so we have a high interest that the trade dispute between China and US could be sorted out. I think it would be beneficial for both economies. And for the car market, it's really the biggest concern we probably have worldwide.
For most automakers, tariffs are a top concern. Not only are they worried about how added taxes would increase vehicle prices and potentially impact sales, they're also concerned about the potential impact on global supply chains.
You know, once upon a time, American cars were made in America, Japanese cars were made in Japan, and German cars were made in Germany. It was that simple. But that model is long and dead. And so when you're talking about, you know, tariffing like President Trump is, German cars that are being imported to America, it doesn't exist anymore. German cars are built in America.
These are the vehicles automakers are banking on selling in large numbers in the coming years. They look promising if the auto industry can get past the roadblocks obscuring their view. Dan Williams, CGTN, Detroit.
Well, on that note, let's take a look at commodities today. Gold prices holding steady, supported by a slight retreat in the dollar today. Now, gains were capped by a modest recovery in equities, as of course caution set in ahead of that no confidence vote on British Prime Minister Theresa May's government. Oil prices also holding steady today after climbing about 3% in the previous session. That's on the expectation that OPEC-led production cuts will tighten supply and that possible Chinese stimulus might help the global economy. Well, let's head into a short break. Here's a look at what's still to come. A surge in domestic demand forces Nigerian farmers to look for alternative options.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Now heading to Nigeria, let's take a look at the country's growing list of farmers who are taking on soil-less technologies to increase yields and meet a surging domestic demand for food. Now, Nigeria's government recently waived taxes on all inputs to encourage more farmers there to invest in hydroponic farms. Let's take a look.
Samson Ogbole is a biochemistry graduate who grows yam tubers without soil in Oyo State in southwest Nigeria. All he needs is a controlled environment where young tubers are regularly sprayed with nutrients-rich mist by a process known as aeroponics. Samson has been growing yams like this for about 4 years now. He says the output per acreage is about tenfold compared to conventional farming. He spends a tiny fraction on fertilizers and water, and he is able to completely eliminate costs on herbicides. Yams are widely eaten across Nigeria, but ability of farmers to keep pace with demand has come under severe constraint.
We have so many things mitigating against farmers, such as there is low level of nutrients available for the farmer. There is also the fact that we have tribal clashes from one place to another. Then you have the Boko Haram crisis, and all of these has ensured that farmers are not able to farm in so many of these villages.
Which is why this giant hydroponic plant was created some 85 kilometers north of the capital, Abuja. The owners are investing some 1 million euros to make this the most ambitious hydroponic project ever undertaken in Nigeria. So far, it sits on 1 hectare, but there is a plan to expand it to 16 hectares.
The idea is not only about the soil losing value and then the population growing, so there could be land grabbing and so on. No, it's about productivity. We have to take into cognizance Nigeria is growing at an average population of 3.7. Give it 30 years from here, we're looking at about 400 million people. How do you feed them?
About 70% of Nigeria's population is dependent on farming, but modern techniques are out of reach for most of them. Most of them cannot afford it even after the government has waived off taxes on hydroponic inputs.
It's still very expensive for an ordinary farmer. So I think Nigeria needs to create a further incentive to support, and a few things could be done, either a direct negotiation by producers of these technologies, or try to find in create more enablers for investors that are not thinking about this today in Nigeria, that have the capital to go into this, to venture into investing in this area.
Nigeria's government has been encouraging local food production to offset its exorbitant import bill, but those efforts are yet to bear fruit. On average, the country spends around $11.2 billion yearly on importation of essential food items. Terry Wangare, CGTN.
Now, before we go, let's check in on Africa's currencies today. We saw Kenya's shilling firming up, clawing back some of its losses from the previous trading session, of course, when it had weakened due to Tuesday's terrorist attack on a hotel complex in the capital. Now, South Africa's rand continues to record gains against major global currencies. Now, the currency has been quite resilient this week so far, and it still remains the best performing emerging market currency against the dollar so far this year. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.